Oh.
Okay. I'd like to call the regular council meeting of February the 14th, 2022 to order. And we are honored to be gathered on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. So first on the agenda is approval.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Next, we have the minutes of the meetings. Adoption.
Move it up.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Carried. No delegations, no unfinished business. Correspondence. The council received the correspondence from Mark Rattan, P. Engineer, General Manager of Engineering Services, a CBRD, request for letter of support for Comox Valley Regional District South Sewer Extension Project.
Receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. And you have before you the letter and the presentation. Is there someone here from the regional district? I don't see anyone.
No, there is not. It's just a correspondence for this one.
Okay, so they are asking for us to support a letter to an application that they are sending in to fund their wastewater servicing for the Royston and Union Bay areas. Yes, Councillor Kettler.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to it. It's also looking to provide sewer services to future KFN lands. And I was thinking about the letter, and it's probably important to write in there that we support the same goals as the sewer project for Royston and Union Bay, in that we want to improve water quality in the Trent and protect Main Sound. And also that we support KFN and their initiative there, and their goals of self-government. But this is a grant that we'll be competing with for our sewer upgrade application, the ICIP grant funding. And so I think it's good that we mention that there's similar goals that need to be achieved from both projects.
That makes it much better for all of us for them to recognize that we are, how important it is to the Comox Valley to get this funding to fix issues that have been ongoing for many years. Is there anybody else that would like to comment? No? Someone like to make the motion then?
I can move it. That council support the Comox Valley Regional District Sewer Extension South project to provide Royston and Union Bay with wastewater services and the associated applications for funding, as they are aligned with our mutual goals of keeping the Trent clean and what else?
So Trent, Main Sound, and supporting KFN and their economic development goals as well.
Thank you.
Okay, seconder. Someone like to second that?
I just did.
Oh, okay, sorry. All in favor? Carried. Next, recommend that council receive the correspondence from Lindsay McGinn, facilitator, Comox Valley Community Health Network, request for support for a poverty reduction grant application. I think Councillor Sullivan, you had asked for this to be put on the agenda.
Yeah, as well as Councillor Kettler and Councillor. Yeah.
So either one of you like to speak to it?
I was last to the table if you guys want to talk to it.
Councillor Kettler?
Yeah, I can speak to it. Yeah, so this has come to the regional district, and even though we are having our own challenges with staffing, absenteeism, and other issues there, the Community Health Network has offered to step up and be the main advocate for this grant funding opportunity, and that the region would carry the funds delivered by the grant as we have with past grant funding. So this would be phase 2 of the poverty reduction grant. We were already successful with phase 1, and many of those funds have already been distributed. They're pretty broad goals with poverty reduction, and pretty lofty ones. I would say, like a 50% reduction or 25% reduction in poverty by 2024, I believe it was. So, we're going to do our best to meet those goals, and hopefully, as Lindsay had said in the letter, that they'll be taking on a bulk of the work for the application and a bulk of the work for helping to deliver on those goals. So.
Anyone else? Councillor Brown?
No, happy to support this. It's great that it's coming forward for the next steps, and I think the Health Network is a great partner on it.
I noticed in the correspondence that the Comox Valley Accessibility Committee is a potential partner. Is there anybody from Cumberland that sits on our accessibility also have a connection to the Comox Valley Accessibility Committee?
Yes, I believe Judy sits on the Comox Valley Accessibility Committee.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Or to bring it, yeah.
All right, Councillor Sullivan?
I'll move it. Yep. I'll move the council endorse a regional application to the UBCM Poverty Reduction Planning and Action Program 2022, Stream 2, Action for a Collective Impact Approach to Poverty Reduction in the Comox Valley, with the Comox Valley Regional District applying for, receiving, and managing the grant funding on behalf of the Village of Cumberland.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Reports. The council received the development variance permit and frontage exemption 3132 Grant Road report.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Am I not talking loud enough today? Sorry.
Yes, you are. I
Okay,
can
sorry.
hear you.
No, speak up. Mumbling a bit. Sorry.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is Melena's away today, so I'm introducing her reports for her. This is a development variance permit application at 3132 Grant Road to vary the frontage, the required frontage for one proposed strata lot from 30 meters to 10 meters, and to exempt the same strata lot from a 10% minimum frontage requirement, 10% of the perimeter. And that one is a requirement of the Local Government Act. So you've seen this application before in a different form. Council received and approved a development permit for this 3-lot subdivision, industrial subdivision on Grant Road early in middle of 2021. So they have now progressed with their subdivision plans and have applied for the required variance. So on page 29 of your package, you can see the proposed subdivision plan. There is a common property access route to access 2 of the 3 strata lots, strata lot 1 and 2. And for strata lot 1, this means it's only a 10 meter frontage on that strata lot. And it's a 30-meter frontage required in the zoning bylaw. This is supported by staff because there is no need to access lands beyond. So there's no need for this road to be a public road to extend to development beyond. So it's preferred at the staff level for this to be this common property access road, and there's no concerns with the limited street frontage in this case. So just scrolling back up, working electronically. The recommendation is that council approve the development variance permit to reduce the frontage of proposed strata lot 1 from 30 meters to 10 meters, and that council exempts strata lot 1 from the 10% minimum frontage requirement.
Thank you. Any questions from members of council? Councillor Brown?
Yeah, this really was challenging my brain while I was reading it, because there's a number 1 on the 2 skinny, if we're still looking at page 29, the 2 skinny lots on the top, that front Grant Road. We're not talking about that number 1. We're talking about the bottom number 1, right?
That's correct, where it says proposed strata lot 1. Yes.
And so the frontage is not onto Grant Road, and it's actually not even really onto the common property access. It's an interior thing. Sort of.
The frontage is onto the common property access.
Okay. And so my only concern was with this was around the wildlife corridors, and they are not impacted at all because they're on the other side, right? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. And this access route was part of the development permit application. So that access route isn't new information, that was considered at that time as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Sproul, do you have any questions? No. Councillor Sullivan?
No.
Councillor Kettler?
No.
Someone like to move then?
I can move it. That council approve the development variance permit to reduce the frontage of proposed strata lot 1 on property described as lot C, section 30, plan VIP 69479 3132 Grant Road, and that council exempt strata lot 1 of the proposed subdivision at 3132 Grant Road from a 10% minimum frontage requirement pursuant to Local Government Act, section 512, to allow a frontage of 1.14%.
Seconder? All in favor? Carried. Next, we have that council received development variance permit 2782 Alverston Avenue report.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
So this is a development variance permit application for 2782 Alverston Avenue. And the application is to vary the rear setback to allow the corner of a deck, second-story deck and staircase to project 1.5 meters into the 3-meter setback. The rear, so there's a rear setback on a lane. And you have seen this property recently before council approved an official community plan and zoning bylaw amendment in August to bring this fourplex into compliance with the OCP and the zoning. They are now in the process of doing renovations and applying for a building permit to bring the property up to code. And owners have determined that they would like to rearrange the deck and the front access to one of the units. The purpose is so they don't lose any parking spaces. And you will see the image of what's going on here on page 36 of the package. There's an inset that shows where the corner of this deck and staircase would project into that rear setback area. So the recommendation is that council approve this development variance permit.
Questions? Nobody has their hand up, so somebody want to make the motion?
I'll move that council approve the development variance permit 2021-24 DV to reduce the exterior rear setback for a deck on the property described as Lot 1 District Lot 24, Nelson District Plan 28034, except part in Plan VIP 82131 2782 Alverston Avenue.
Second. All in favor? Carried. Next, that council received the development permit 3699 Bevan Road report for information.
Receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Whoops. That's what you got, you're writing on your laptop.
So the
Yes.
village received this development permit application from the Comox Valley Regional District for development permit is required prior to building permit for construction of their new leachate equalization pond to expand their capacity to handle leachate. So the reason this is being presented to you now for information is a bit unusual, is because later on the agenda, there is an application for a report regarding their application to rezone the section of the property to allow for this leachate equalization pond. We wanted to present the rezoning and the development permit at the same time. However, the development permit can't be approved until such time until after the zoning has been amended. So unless there are questions, I wasn't planning on doing a long introduction to this development permit report. But I will still be on the part of the meeting when the rezoning application is presented later. Or if you wish to ask questions about this now, you may do so, of course.
I would like to divide it and have the questions asked now. It will make the other process go quicker. Okay. If everybody is fine with that. Any questions concerning this? Councillor Kettler?
No.
Yeah, so the area that is currently treed, which is a pretty small area, but still, we don't have our tree bylaw yet, but I was wondering if we could make a request about the replanting of trees. And I know that they have said that we want to put off sort of the buffer zone area to another phase of the development, but it would be nice still, because the trees are being cut in this phase of the development, to have a conversation about replacement of trees, possibly within that other buffer zone.
Mm-hmm. So you're thinking of the trees that we're going to need to be removed for,
yes.
Yeah. Yes, we can certainly have that conversation.
Okay, great.
Okay.
And sorry, are we going to talk as well about the trail or multi-use path that we are discussing was part of the concept plan for the industrial lands, and how much of that will be contributed to with this particular project and development permit?
So if we want to try to separate the two processes, rezoning and development permit, the proposed statutory right-of-way for the multi-use path is technically part of the rezoning process. And then in this development permit, the vegetative buffer at the northern property line is really the main notable requirement in this development permit.
Okay, so we'll talk about the path at the rezoning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you said that you would have that conversation about tree replacement in the buffer zone with the regional district at some point.
Yeah, I think because this is this report is just for information, and this report on the development permit will come back after the rezoning, not assuming the rezoning is successful. If at such a point the land is rezoned, then we'll bring this back. Okay. And I can address that in the report.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything further from anyone? Nope, then we'll move along. Next, we have that council received the asset management policy report.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Thank you, Council. So what you have before you is our asset management policy report. So Council did receive this at the last committee of the whole. and had a conversation at that point in time. So what's before council today was recommended from the committee to be moved forward to council for consideration of adoption. One thing I will advise, obviously, this is the first step in many steps regarding asset management, and staff at this point in time are continuing to develop the next phases, which include the creation of the asset management plan, additional training, a risk analysis of the organization. So there's a number of steps that will be taken in the coming months here, and a number of reports that will come back. But this is, that kind of fundamental piece here, that policy that allows to have that guiding policy for staff as well as council to be able to move asset management forward in the manner that council wishes. So it's here for your consideration, and certainly happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Kettler?
Yeah, no, I think it was a good conversation that we had at Committee of the Whole, and obviously asset management is really important. We have a lot of aging infrastructure, but the other thing that came up at Committee of the Whole, of course, was a conversation around the natural assets, and even though this is super high level because it is a policy, it does cover what we want to do in the future. And we get it, as was discussed, we'll get into more details about how much into the weeds we want to get with natural assets and valuation of them and putting them on our books like some other municipalities have. So yes, more fun to come with future conversations. Thanks.
Councillor Sullivan?
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking forward to this. We need this pretty bad, and moving forward to the future, we need to know what we're up to. And I'm happy to see this coming forward.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, just happy to see it moving forward with the inclusion of natural asset management.
Councillor Sproul? Oh, okay, I think it's an excellent, and I think it spells it out quite clearly what we're doing, and I think it was very well done, and it's going to be really interesting to see it move forward, because it's definitely needed in the community. Okay, the motion is there.
I can move it, and that council adopt the asset management policy.
Seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Next, we have that council received the BC Watershed Security Strategy and Fund Advocacy Report.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So a couple weeks back, the province launched their engagement process via the issuance of a discussion paper on their watershed security strategy and fund. This was a commitment they made in their mandate letter back in fall 2020. And there's lots of interesting content and things to consider within that strategy, but recognizing the timelines and our ability to work with our consultants and partners in the Perseverance Watershed Initiative, we wanted to put this forward to council now to draw your attention to it and propose a plan for village response per the proposed resolutions, just to put together a response that outlines the unique situation that we find ourselves in here on the east coast of Vancouver Island, in addition to some of the innovative work that we're doing now that I think has shown progress to date and opportunities that may come from that, so long as provincial dollars flow through a proposed fund such as this. So any questions, let me know.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much, Kevin. I was looking at the website just before we got our packages, wondering how we were going to get input in. So thank you so much for bringing this forward. And I think you're right. I think we do need to look at the unique situation that Eastern Vancouver Island is in with privately owned forest lands on our doorstep. So yeah, looking forward. This will come back to us for before it goes out, or is staff taking the lead with the partners?
Yeah, the intent was, with council's direction, we would proceed to put forward, and it would largely be background information, just framing the context for the situation we find ourselves in, and then speak to the issues around, kind of the technical, and speaking to some of the council's previous thoughts on the matter related to, lack of jurisdiction or governance, and some of the issues within the discussion paper. I think they list 10 different objectives of it, and many of them have already, I think, been addressed by council through the Perseverance Watershed Initiative in the terms of reference, outreach to Comox First Nation and involvement with them, and et cetera, et cetera. So,
Councillor Sullivan?
It's awesome to read this. I'd almost think that maybe we were getting some traction. Is that what it feels like with getting a bit forward with this? Yeah, I really hope that we can put our best foot forward here and get some money, buy some of our watershed. Thanks, Kevin.
Councillor Kettler?
Yeah, I think it's great, because we have been doing so much work on this front, to have some of that, especially with our community members and community forest, that they've been doing such great work, and to have it recognized with what we're doing with the Perseverance, and to let the province know that, like was said earlier, that we are unique here with surrounded by private matched forest lands on the islands. And when you talk to the province, they don't always recognize that plight, I guess, because it is unique, and the rest of the province has the population and a louder ear when it comes to deciding what to do in watersheds. So I think this is a step forward, and I think it is an indication that that they're starting to listen, and hopefully starting to support some of these grassroots initiatives that are happening, because I think they see the benefit of it, and they've been told that they know that data collection is a really big piece of it as well, and monitoring is going to be really important for the future to see what climate impacts are, and to make sure that we are managing forests in a way that is not negatively affecting water quality and water supply. So yeah, I'm happy that this has come forward, and happy that that staff have put forward the work of the Perseverance Initiative as well. Thanks.
And I'll ask Councillor Spruill again. I will say that Councillor Spruill is in Mexico and is on her phone, and she's having difficulty on the phone. So she is listening, from what I understand. So I don't know if you're going to comment, Councillor Spruill, or if you can. Anyway, yeah, your sound is not coming in properly. Okay, we'll have to move along. Anyways, thank you very much, Kevin, for all your work you're doing on this project. It is amazing that they've actually released funds, and they recognize the problems that we are having in our communities to protect our watersheds. And this is certainly timely for the village, because we've been at it for quite a few years about all the concerns that we have. And it's just not the forest companies and their logging practices, it's what the land also.
But it says join with computer audio, but I don't know.
Okay, well, we'll try and get back to you after this one, okay? Because you're not having very much success. So there's a motion there to be made.
So I'll move that council direct staff to prepare a written submission on behalf of the Village of Cumberland in response to the January 25th, 2022 BC Watershed Security Strategy and Fund discussion paper and corresponding engagement opportunity. and that the response requests that the unique context of Eastern Vancouver Island be considered in the strategy's development and implementation, and describes the Perseverance Watershed Initiative as an innovative approach to pursuing local watershed security.
Seconder? All in favor? Carried. Next, we have that council received the wastewater upgrade project update for information.
Receive.
All in favor? Carried.
Okay. Can you hear me? I'm in Kamloops, not Mexico, but I hope I'm coming through. So, all right. Just before I dive into my report, just a footnote relating to the previous report for council's information. The consideration of the houses on the Comox Lake area, the wastewater from those, septic fields and so on, that will be part of our scope of study for the stage 3 liquid waste management plan that we will embark on next year. So that particular part as it relates to liquid waste will be included in that process. So that's part of the catchment protection, but was obviously not the focus of the previous presentation. So with that, we'll get into the main event here about wastewater. And it's great to be back in front of council again. I wish it was about how much we've done as opposed to how much the costs have gone up, but this is our reality. I'm just going to share the screen here and then briefly go through the report, and then we shall take questions. Okay. Everybody can see my screen? All right. So the two motions here obviously received the report for information. This one here, I will circle back to at the end. It's more of an administrative detail to allow us to move on. But the main event here is about the changes. And I presume you've all read the report, so I'm just going to highlight what I consider to be the key parts of it. This table here is pretty much what we produced at the end of our LWMP process. And we said we had this minimal project to get into permit compliance. And then if we do some other nice things, we end up at this one of 9.7 million. We do the wetland augmentation into our reed bed, and that is what led to our current project. And we had defined it back in the day as phase 1, 2A and 2B, 2B being these works required in the future. And that would be another 3 million to be done sometime in the next decade. And at the time in 2017, we thought that would be about 2027 or 2028. So I want to emphasize our project is 9.7, but we had contemplated there'd be future works to happen. And it was the decision of the LWMP committee at the time to just go for this one. So things have happened with our design process. We've had this part here, preliminary conceptual design. Well, it took us till the end of the year to finish that off because of all of these changes. I won't run through all of the reasons of the changes here and now. I hope you've read the report, other than to say a big part of it relates to this. And I'm just going to focus on the financial implications. But if you have questions about the technical parts of the changes, then I'll be happy to answer them. So if we scroll down to the budget changes, or the scope changes, okay? The phasing, it's back to the same phase structure that we had in our LWMP. Phase 1 is what we need to do to achieve compliance. And what's changed? We need this different aeration system called diffused aeration to completely mix the lagoons, to be able to maintain treatment quality in the high summer temperatures such as we saw during the heat dome, but we had actually seen it happening over the previous few years, but the heat dome in June was just the most extreme example. And then our headworks screen, originally we planned to install a second, now we need to replace the existing one and install a new one. So these are things that relate to permit compliance, which was the original objective of phase 1. 2A, the reed bed and the wetland are still there. 2B, the future things, tertiary filtration, and this new one about relocating the Maple Lake Creek channel because of seismic stability. So those are, that's a new item on the game that can be done in the future, but we have the possibility of doing it now. But in any case, it's sort of an obligation or a liability, if you like, that Cumberland has to face effectively within the next few years. Typo here, that should say 2C, the stormwater wetland. This is a new addition, and I actually have some pictorial slides to show about that in just a moment. And then the budget. So here we go. Our phase one, the original scope, our current estimates for doing that come to 10 million. We've gone from 9.7 to 10 million with the reed bed and the wetland in there, and not including over here the extra costs for diffused aeration and the headworks screening. All right, when we add in all of these extra costs, 4.7 million is what we're estimating for a total of 14.7. So I'll just remind you, the previous LWMP estimate had that future cost at 12.9. So we've gone up by 2 million. It's not that suddenly there's 4.7 million we hadn't thought about. It's there's an extra 2 million we hadn't thought about, and we think it's best to bring the remaining 3 million forward if possible, which is the topic of the grant funding application. If we do our whole project, all of these phases, right, do them all in one, 14.7 million. I've recreated the top line here. The original phase one from the LWMP was 5.6, the minimum required to achieve permit compliance. And we still go with this structure because council has the discretion to pursue only that goal. And where we're at, it's now 10 million to achieve the permit compliance. We wouldn't be doing the reed bed and the wetland, but we would be doing everything else that we have to do. And these other works get delayed. So that's where it's at. And if we stayed with that, authorised budget increases from 9.7 to 10. Okay, obviously what I would prefer is to seek additional grant funding. We have that possibility, but this is our current situation. And we will be bringing forward a report 4 weeks from now about the budget for phase one. We've got more detailed information happening as we get costs on the major equipment. So we've actually gone out to RFP for some things. So what were just estimates now become firm costs. So we'll be able to come back with a more accurate estimate and whether we actually need to increase the budget or not in a month's time. But what is clear right now is for doing all of these extra things, phase 2A, 2B, and 2C, there's substantial extra costs there. What we propose to do is change the scope of our current approved project. I'll just go to the table. We had discussions with the province on this, and effectively the reed bed and the wetland, these two beautiful components, would come out, and the extra costs for the lagoon aeration and headworks screening go in to create this structure. Phase one is 10 million. And that's what we're obligated to do under our existing ICIP funding. GMF is a slightly different beast. And we put everything for phase two, all the other works into phase two for this future project, 4.7 million. And of course, if we can get the additional funding, that's great. And if not, if council wishes to just stay with phase one, we can delay the phase 2B works, tertiary filtration and the channel infill. These are things that have to be done sooner or later. And we think we've got about 5 years. The reed bed and the wetland, we don't need to do at all from a regulatory point of view, but we did apply for GMF funding based upon those. So if we're not going to do the reed bed and the wetland, we give up our GMF funding. And a bit more detail in that on the next report. So the budget update, we'll bring forward this budget update 4 weeks' time. I think we'll be pretty close. Maple Rinders. it is actually, this is the key point on this. I'm not quite used to running through these things on Zoom, so just bear with me. But anyway, we would like to get going on some work with Maple Rinders, the site clearing work in mid to late March. And rather than wait until 4 weeks from now, mid-March, we'd like to get authorization for them to start. The administrative process here with the construction management model is all the work that gets done, every subcontractor that is retained or equipment bought shows up as an amendment to the Maple Rinders contract. It's just the way this one works. So we'd approved 1.5 million to hire them as the construction manager. And then as they go through the rest of the budget of the project, phase 1 project, it will go up to 7.7 million because they're going to buy 5.2 million worth of services. So this is the recommendation here, is to approve an increase in their budget for $200,000, increase in their contract, I should say. This is not an increase in the project budget, but just allows us to start work on that. Just to finish off, a new section here about climate change. It's these climate events that have caused us to change to diffuse aeration. They've caused us to give up on the gravity flow because there's a flood risk associated with those works. So extra cost, extra energy use to create this climate resiliency. We hadn't expected that, but that's what it is. We need to use energy to combat these climate change effects. And we have to track the GHGs as part of the project. It's interesting, the increased energy use will increase the GHG footprint. So climate mitigation, GHG reductions, we're going backwards in order to go forwards on climate resiliency. It's an interesting counterintuitive development in planning for infrastructure projects. So that's the world we live on this. Okay, so just to summarize that for this report here, we're at 9.7 is what we're authorized. We think these works with the restructure I'm proposing will actually amount to 10, but we'll come back in 4 weeks for that. And for today, we're just looking for authorization of $200,000 within the existing budget to start on the site clearing works. And I think I'll stop there for this report and take any questions from council. And just keep in mind, we'll talk about grant funding for the next report. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go around the table for questions. So Councillor Sullivan.
I don't have any questions. Just mentioned earlier about how sobering this report is, but it's almost a good thing, I guess, that we had those record high flows this summer. I mean, it's bad that we're going to have to spend more money and kind of retreat and make up some new plans. But I mean, if this happened next year and we were halfway through, that would be worse. So this is sort of a good news, the good news of the bad news situation. So thanks for that report, Paul.
Okay, Councillor Kettler.
Yeah, thanks for the report, Paul. Just a bit more on the increased energy use and the increased operating costs, I guess that would result from that. So before we had the idea that we would have a gravity feed system. Because of the increased flows that we experience, we're now talking about having a pumped system. Is that pump system going to be operating 24/7, or is this sort of an emergency pump system where it's just going to be operating at high flows?
That's a great question. It's actually almost the reverse of what you just described there. It'll operate 24/7, taking the base flow. So the flow, like the summertime level of flow, it will all get pumped up and into the treatment components, everything up to 3,600 cubic meters per day. When we have the wet weather in winter and our flows get anywhere up to 15,000 or more, we don't know exactly what it was on the 3rd of November because the flow measurement gets inaccurate at such high flows. But the key point is the flow above 3,600 bypasses the treatment works and flows by gravity through a separate disinfection channel to the creek. So if we regard that as the emergency bypass, it's not an overflow. It bypasses the nutrient removal. It gets disinfection and goes into the creek by gravity. And what it was is that we couldn't do the nutrient removal and in the future the tertiary filtration and maintain the gravity flow because we lose head during those operations, and in the winter high water level conditions, we'd be, at the end of that, we'd have to pump up to the creek. And so logistically, it's better to pump up at the start. So it's an interesting one. The energy use involved with pumping the water is actually not that great. We will have to lift it 4 meters from the lagoon to the top of the solid separation units. So that is a probably a $5,000 electricity bill for the year. And actually, the change from gravity flow to pump flow, it's not much of an operational cost change. It's not even that much of a change in capital cost for the project. It has cost us time in delay for the design and a redesign. That's probably the major cost. The other one about the diffused aeration, the horsepower for aeration will go from approximately 20 horsepower to between 100 and 150 horsepower. So that one is the big one and will incur possibly a $50,000 electricity bill. So that's dealing with the hot weather in summer to maintain treatment. So that's the bigger one there for energy and GHGs. Dealing with the wet weather is thankfully a minor cost, a minor engineering change, and a major improvement in the flood resiliency. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, so you did start into my other question about the aeration, but is that also a 24/7, or is that just in hot weather?
It is a 24/7 operation, but the increased air demand is indeed in hot weather. So what we're looking to do is to have it, we can operate on reduced aeration, reduced air and reduced power in winter. And then in summer, when we need the extra air, as the water gets warmer, you need more air just to maintain the same level of oxygen. We would up the airflow rate in summer. So that's a design criteria that Troy Vassos and I are working on here as to how to make sure that once that we have several blowers, and in winter, the idea is we can run one, in summer, we'd run 2, and possibly a third during the extreme times. So it's a case of we have to have the capacity there to handle that high load, but it doesn't mean we have to run full capacity all year round. So once we've got the design detailed on that, we'll be able to come back with a meaningful estimate on what the actual energy use and cost is.
Okay, thanks. And we'll talk about the capital costs in the next report, I guess.
Councillor Graham?
I thank you. Thanks, Paul, for the report. I just want to go back to the de-scoping the reed bed and the wetland. And I know maybe this question is for the next report, but you can let me know. I'm just worried that if we are pulling that we may lose it forever. And I think it's a really vital piece of the project that the community is particularly attached to. Can you just speak to that?
So the intention of the de-scoping is to allow it to not be part of the current ICIP funding. And doesn't mean that Cumberland doesn't have to do it, but the idea being that we can complete the project and I'll start again. The idea being that we can apply for the reed bed and the wetland under this new ICIP 3 opportunity. You can't apply to 2 funds for the same scope item. So that was what the province made very clear. We'd originally proposed to keep that in and apply for extra funding for the diffused aeration and the headwork screening. And they said, no, those things were already in the original scope. Their cost has gone up. And so they said, what you need to do here is keep those in the original project. And if you want, you can de-scope reed bed and wetland and apply for them again. Now, if we don't get it, we apply for them again, we don't get it, Cumberland still has the choice to go forward and do them anyway, right? But it's really the de-scoping is to allow us to apply again as part of the second phase. And the nuances around that with the GMF funding, I think just hold off till I go through the next report because that will answer it more completely. So,
Thank you.
does that satisfy you for now?
Yeah, I'll wait for the GMF funding. Yeah.
My question is, these are not hard costs. They're not the final costs for these works.
They're the best information that we have at this time. So when we come back in a month from now, we will have hard costs for the major, phase one items. So the solid separation units, which are roughly $1 million for the two of them. So we'll come back with harder costs on the phase one things. We'll know what it is we're doing, what we need to do to design around it and install it and so on. The phase two items, the level of accuracy won't improve much actually at all at the moment because we're not doing any more work. But if we choose to go forward with the grant funding application, and depending which option we go for here, we would then progress with preliminary design on those probably in the fall. And that's when there'd be further refinement of the costs. So at the moment, it's our best estimates based on the conceptual design is what I have for you here today. Phase one costs will be refined further in a month's time, but the phase two ones will remain at their current level of accuracy until we do more design work on them.
Do we have a built-in contingency?
Yes. So I didn't make that clear from this. The costs as presented include a 20% contingency on the direct construction cost for phase one items. So what that means is not the engineering design, not the construction management. We already have those contracts in place and those are firm costs. But where I'd said there's going to be $5.2 million of construction activity for the phase one works, included in that is a 20% contingency, so $1 million. For the phase two works, as I've presented here, I've made that number a 30% contingency, reflecting that we're not as advanced on design, we haven't specified materials and that sort of thing. So we have reasonably accurate numbers on the design part, what it'll cost for construction management of it, but the actual materials and subcontractors, 20% contingency for phase one, 30% for phase two.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further questions, then we'll have a motion from council.
I'll move that council approve an amendment of $200,000 to the Maple Renders contract from 1.5 million to 1.7 million for site clearing works.
Seconder. Councillor Brown, all in favor? Carried. Okay, next, that council receive the wastewater upgrade project ICIP grant funding application report.
You received.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll share my screen again. And where are we? Okay, so the grant funding application. We've got many more recommendations here. So we have some options on strategy. I have what is my preferred strategy, but council may differ. The de-scoping. So if you said, actually, we are not interested in applying for any more grant funding at all, and we just want to pull right back, then there's no need to apply for the scope change, right? So that's why it's the second one. And then applying for the grant itself, and then committing for the Village of Cumberland portion. It's a little bit higher than what you'd expect, and I'll explain more of that in a minute. Okay, so that's the basis for this report. We've actually just gone through, of course, the scope and cost changes. All right. Phase two, 4.7 on top of what we think is 10 for phase one. All right. So that's the structure I just presented last time. 10 and 4.7. We are trying to fund this extra work. And what I've done compared to the previous one, you'll notice the reed bed and the wetland are now over here in phase 2. All right, so this is my project structure. Assume we de-scope them from phase 1, we bring the other things in here into phase 1. This is the same grant funding that the regional district is going for, pays 73% of the eligible costs, and it has basically the same requirements as what we did before. But it was interesting to see this in their description. The most green-focused infrastructure funding I've seen yet. So it aligns well with these aspirational goals, such as the reed bed and the wetland itself. And Councillor Brown's comment, when we had the discussion with the province about de-scoping, it was highlighted that these things are thoroughly in alignment with these goals of the funding program. It's not a guarantee that we'll get funding for them again, but I think it's as good as we're going to get, and they're right on the money. It's not just putting in pipes, it's actually doing these sorts of things. The timing of it created a wrinkle. Because we're already underway, it changes what is eligible, and we won't get a decision until March of next year, by which time we expect phase 1 works to be complete. So believe it or not, by then we will have pretty much finished our $10 million project, all being well. But if we start up here, we want to keep them covered by both ICIP 1, 3 and GMF, has to be completed by the end of 2023. Our GMF funding window was originally to the end of 2021, actually. We applied for it, if you can believe it, 4 years ago. We've had it extended, and I'll extend it again to the end of 2023, but no further. So for the reed bed and the wetland to be partly covered by the GMF funding, they have to be done this year or next. And if we want the reed bed and the wetland to be covered by the ICIP3 funding, we won't have our decision until March of next year, then they have to be done next year. And we have this construction window of 9 months for the phase 2 work. So my intention was, in having the same project team do the phase 2 work, we literally carry on. We don't need to hire a new project team. Maple Rinders may not even need to demobilize from the site. We can, if it all goes well, we effectively just carry right on into it. But the design work would have to be done beforehand to enable that construction start. And the design team we already have hired, and the construction manager we already have hired. And so what the province said is, because we are not competitively tendering for those 2 entities, and we're doing some of the work before the decision is announced, those costs would not be eligible, right? So we have, in creating the most efficient execution, some of the costs are not eligible for grant funding. To make these costs eligible, require phase 2 as a completely separate project, right? So this is an option where we just say, we'll finish off phase 1, let the dust settle and see where we're at, and then wait for the grant funding decision and reload in 2024 effectively to try and execute the project in 2024. So that's still an option. It's better, you get more coverage of costs by the grant funding, but because the ask for grant funding is greater, we have a lesser chance of getting it. So these are the 3 options as you have them, right? Minimal project, we literally give up on the reed bed and the wetland, do what we have to do right now, and pursue phase 2B, the tertiary filtration, the channel relocation in the future. If we're going to apply for the grant funding, it's option 2 or 3. We either try and do it as the integrated project, roll straight on and do it, and accept that part of the costs, the design engineer, project manager, construction manager won't be covered by the grant funding, but we will get the most efficient execution and the fastest execution, and the project gets done. And then the third option here, 2 separate projects, right? And in doing so, with option 3, we would give up the GMF funding on the reed bed because we're doing them beyond the timeline of GMF funding. So it's a key point with this overlapping funding. The only way to capture the overlapping funding for everything is the integrated project option. So the costs, phase 1, 10 million, we talked about that. Phase 2, 1.6 and 3.1 adds up to 4.7. If we do option 2, it's integrated project, this 1.6 million is not eligible. For ICIP 3.1 is 73% of that. It's 2.26, and Cumberland has to pay that difference, about 0.8 plus 1.6, 2.44 million. It is still covered by GMF, and that's the final table we'll get to. And if we separate it, completely separate project, right? The cost goes up from 4.7 to 5.2 because you have to do a new procurement process, hire a whole new project team. Possibly I might not be around. They have to come up to speed. So the indirect cost increases every time you split a project into a separate phase with a separate team. But we get better grant coverage, and Cumberland's share is lower. But we increase the risk that we might not get the grant funding because we're asking for 3.8 million for the same actual work and outcomes as what we could achieve for 2.26 if we go for option 2. So that's the game we play. And this table here, and I will just full screen my screen so it's all of there. This is what sums it up for these strategies. All right, option 1, we give up on GMF, we don't apply for funding, we just do our $10 million project. In the future, we come back and do tertiary filtration channel relocation, and Cumberland's obligation, 6.27 million. And it's very important to keep in mind, in scaling back here, we still have these future works, 2.18 million to do. So strategy 2, the integrated project, we keep the GMF funding, we go for the new funding, and if we get it, we're in this column, it's wonderful. All right, we do the whole project right now, next 2 years. We have to contribute this much out of reserves. The total obligation in paying off the GMF loan over the 20 years is 6.47, and we have no future works because we've done them. In going for option 2, we are committing to doing the reed bed and the wetland, even if we don't get the funding, right? So that's phase 2A, and our initial project is 12 million. So to Councillor Brown's question, we've de-scoped it from ICIP to enable a reapplication. If we don't get it, we're still going to do it anyway. And we have what is now the $12.7 million project. The original ICIP funding, nothing from ICIP 3 because we didn't get it. And the GMF loan, we max it out at 4.4. That's the limit of our borrowing authority. That comes then with a grant of 0.66. And we have to contribute $500,000 in reserves. This is if we don't get the ICIP funding. All right, and you can see the total obligation for the initial project is the same. And then in the future, we've got to do this. So Cumberland's total obligation over the 20 years is 8.9 million. We got all the works done over this time, but we didn't get the grant funding. In this one, we got the grant funding and we got all the works done. And finally, option 3, we're going to separate the projects and go for the grant funding, but do it as a completely separate project in 2024 or beyond. And in doing so, we give up the GMF funding, right? And so if we get our funding, ICIP 3, that's great. We get the original one, another 3.8 million out of them. We don't have anything from GMF. We borrow 4.3 through the Municipal Finance Authority. So you can see the borrowing is almost the same in all cases. And we get all of the works done, right? So if we receive the grant in either case, we get all the works done. Cumberland's obligation for the initial project is 6 million. And overall, it remains at 6 million. So we got more grant funding in this scenario, but in my opinion, we have a less chance of getting that extra grant funding because we're asking for this much instead of this much for the same amount of work. So from the province and federal government's point of view, strategy 2 is the best value. It's the most efficient execution. And for them, they are contributing the least funding for getting the most outcome. And then the final thing, if we go for option 3, separate the projects, and then we don't get the grant funding, it's the equivalent here of option 1. We do our phase 1 project, $10 million, achieve our permit compliance. In the future, we have to come back and do phase 2B, tertiary filtration and the channel relocation. And it's optional up to council in the future whether you do the reed bed in the wetland or not. So it comes down to, we just haven't got funding. There might be future opportunities, but we're basically saying these things are remain optional. So that is actually a summary of that whole paragraph here, the analysis of the options, right? Option 1's the cheapest way to get out of it. Option 2, we're going for as much funding as we can, and if we get it, we get the most work done in the shortest time and get the project over. Option 3, separated, but we lose that. We have to actually say to GMF, we are giving up your funding because we choose not to do the reed bed in the wetland at this time. Right, so that's the key thing. We're actually, in going for option 3, we are giving up GMF funding. So that's my analysis. Option 2 is better value per grant dollar, highest chance of getting the grant, and the greatest cost incurred to Cumberland if we don't get it. But despite that, that is still my preferred option. So then, down here, thanks to Michelle for this, the financial implications, it's about the parcel tax. I just want to look carefully at this. Keep in mind with option 1, we're just doing permit compliance. We're not doing the reed bed, the wetland. We do the future works, tertiary filtration and the channel, and that's our parcel tax to pay off this $6 million obligation. Option 2, we've done everything. And we're at this because a good chunk of that extra work wasn't covered by the second grant. All right. Option 2, if we don't get the grant at all, it costs us even more. Option 3, we get our grant. It's the same, it's almost the same as option 2. And option 3, without the grant, what I'm saying here, it's the same as option 1. In the future, we're just doing whatever we have to do, and we've given up on the reed bed and the wetland. So that's really what it is. If we want to stay with the reed bed and the wetland, we should go for the funding via one of these 2 options. If council wishes to give up on those and leave it to a future council, then we can do so. And I don't see the point in going for extra funding if we're not actually doing the reed bed and the wetland as part of it. We actually have a better chance of getting the funding with those things in there. So that was the financial analysis. And then I just want to let's speak momentarily about this one, the stormwater wetland, because it's a new scope item. And I'm just going to have to stop sharing my screen and reshare it. Okay. Just quickly here for the stormwater wetland to explain what it is, because it relates to the grant funding. Our reformatted project, this is where the works are going now. We finally have a location for the reed bed. It's right here where the trees are. The treatment works will go there. This is going to be the area of our wetland augmentation. And that's the relocated channel, obviously. So that sets where those things go. The stormwater wetland, these big arrows are all the stormwater flows into that wetland area as they are today. And what we're proposing is to catch all of this along here, directed along here into those 3 ponds that were built back in 2008 as the wetland test cells. And there it is on a photo. And we would cut channels in here so the water runs in, settles out here, settles out more there. This is roughly the location of the channel through the canary grass. And then it goes into our relocated channel here. So it's a major exercise in capturing stormwater that comes from quite a large catchment area using these existing ponds, right, all we have to do is a bit of channel work and a bit of channel work here and here. We don't actually have to build a wetland. We're going to use the one that's there. And then a little bit of icing on top. Once we've done this, in summertime, there is no stormwater because it doesn't rain, but we can do this. We can take our high quality reclaimed water and we pump it from here to here, which is a short run and about a 4 meter lift. And then it runs into the stormwater drains and runs along here to here to here to here, round through here and back down. So if we do the stormwater wetland and we get our funding to do all of this, we can then use our high quality treated water to run it through this whole area in summertime and maintain fresh water and nice habitat. These ponds go hot and stagnant in summer at the moment because there's no water changeover. So the stormwater wetland is an exercise in managing the winter water and an opportunity, the best and I think probably the only one, for meaningful use of our reclaimed water in summer, which is to maintain flow and the quality in everything you see here. Because otherwise the outlet, I mean, from the wetland, let's go back to the first slide, is infiltrating into the channel here, but these would still be stagnant. So if we get our funding to do all of this, it's a great one. We will use our reclaimed water to maintain this better ecosystem that we've created. And that scores a lot of points for the grant funding because it specifically talks about use of naturalized assets and things like the use of reclaimed water to maintain or restore a degraded wetland. So this project, it's not only a good thing to do, it's a really good one to improve our chances of getting the grant funding. And with that, I will just come back to my report for the last time. Okay. Oh, that is the end of my report. Okay, I'll just bring it back just to focus the discussion, the recommendations, okay? Preferred strategy from my point of view and from the staff is for phase option 2, where we apply for funding to do everything as an integrated project. If we apply for funding in either way, we do the de-scoping, right? And then my preferred option here, a grant funding ask 2.26 million, and then council has to commit to the remaining amount, which mostly comes from GMF borrowing, and it would be, if we get the project, 270,000 from sewer reserves. So that's a pretty minimal cash contribution. And so with that, I will conclude my report and take any questions from council. Thank you.
Okay, is everybody ready with their questions? Councillor Brown, you want to go first this time?
Thank you, and thanks again, Paul. I'm with you. I really like the addition of the stormwater capacity and the option of being able to give that stormwater to the Trent system. So yeah, I like number 2 because of the efficiency of having the construction team there that already knows the project, because you'll still be with us and be able to continue to guide it, because it's the fastest, because it gives us everything we want, and because it gives us the most chance of getting that funding and doing a really great project. So okay, number 2.
Okay, Councillor Kettler.
I can only imagine how many times you've gone over this, Paul, because I know I had to read it like 3 times. I was just thinking about all these variables and on top of it all, like supply chain issues and then like maybe having to rebid and all this stuff. I was just, it's quite a lot to fit into my small brain, but I think I have settled on the same thing. We obviously don't want to do the minimum and have all of these things left for the next council to deal with to to meet future wastewater requirements. So I don't think option one is right for us. Yeah, splitting up the project, again, it comes with all those risks that Councillor Brown just talked about. Yeah, it just kept coming back to our ability to borrow, I guess, and maybe I can bring Michelle into this conversation a bit. We don't want to lose the Green Municipal Fund funding, because I think it's a good rate. And as Michelle mentioned in her part of the report, the interest rates with the Municipal Finance Authority might fluctuate, whereas the Green Municipal Fund will be stable. So I think that's a factor to consider, as well as we get a small grant with the Green Municipal Fund as well. But just our ability, just thinking about, that we have borrowed for the fire hall, the $4.2 million, that was all debt. And now we're looking at another 4.4. So how big is our municipal credit card, and what is the interest rate looking like, and our ability to pay that, considering the small amount of funds that we get from even a 1% tax increase. So could you maybe speak, Michelle, to our debt load, and how much that might restrict things for us in other areas?
We can't hear you, Michelle.
Sorry about that. We have quite a large borrowing capacity, actually, and the 4.4 million has been part of our calculation from the beginning, because it has to be, because we had we already applied for that and got the loan authorization for that. So it's always been part of it. We weren't expecting to have to use it, and we were going to close it once we were done the project. So we're okay borrowing capacity wise, we are, but of course we have some pretty high payments every year, and including the fire hall and 2 sewer debt loans. We have already paid off our water debt though, but other than the, I guess, maximum for option 2 parcel tax of $204 per year for the 20 years. We have the other stuff in the financial plan as well.
Okay, so that parcel tax is going to cover the full loan that we're talking about, and so that includes the interest on that?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No. Okay, Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you. Thanks again, Paul. I definitely, as part of being the council previous that was also working on this, and now this next council also working on this, I'm very not interested in any other councils working on this. It's been 30 or 40 years of no councils really working on this. So I'm very satisfied with going with option 2 and to try to sew this up. Definitely not ready to let you go, Paul. I would way rather continue to see your confident expertise in our leading our charge here. And I'm really happy to see those summer flows as well. I mean, the only thing we can do is change. And this summer, all those, the heat dome and the wet flows, record highs, as you know, and you've run all those numbers like Councillor Kettler said, I'm sure so many times. But yeah, I'm happy to support option 2. And yeah, I'm hoping that we pull out all these grants and finally sew this up and get some ground broken and stuff.
Okay. Paul, have you had any conversations with the ministry staff on this project?
Yes, I have. So I spoke to the ministry staff about the de-scoping concept, right? Because that was critical here as to how we would structure a new grant funding. So Katrina Weedman is the infrastructure engineer within the ministry. So she's the one who looks at the technical sides of all of these things. And she said, unfortunately, it happens on these projects where you're suffering cost increases that if the municipality can't wear them, that they sometimes have to de-scope the nice to have things. And the primary purpose of the original project, of course, was to achieve the regulatory compliance, and we can't compromise that. So I was told that they'd rather not do it, but they have allowed in the past de-scoping of certain things so that the original main project can get done. And that sometimes leads to the bare bones projects. When we did the original borrowing referendum back in 2018, the 4.4 million was to enable Cumberland to do the minimal project phase 1 and achieve permit compliance, even if we didn't get any grant funding. Because at that point, we'd applied for one thing, been rejected, and had to come back down to earth. We're going to apply for more. In fact, we already had, but in case we don't get it, we'd have to borrow 4.4 to allow Cumberland to do the works it's required to do. And that was before we'd been fined by the ministry. So here it is now. If we thought then, if we got the grant funding, we wouldn't need all 4.4, as Michelle said. And what it is now, even if we get the grant funding, we effectively need all 4.4. And if we don't get the grant funding, it just means we have to give up on some things, reed bed and wetland, which for all the reasons you've discussed, would rather not do. There's some complexity in the analysis of all of this because we have the two different funding, ICRP and GMF. They have different criteria, different timelines. And this is typical for my sorts of projects. I try to get as much funding as I can from any different source. And it just makes this analysis a bit more complex, especially when we're talking about a project change. So to the points from both Councillor Kettler and Sullivan, I have gone through so many iterations on how to do this, and my whiteboard's been written and erased numerous times with, I think I ended up at one point with 21 theoretical combinations as to what could be done, and distilled it down to, we have 3 strategies with 5 possible outcomes depending on what goes on. All the rest, didn't make sense, but there was a lot in there. And it is because we have the 2 funding programs that we're trying to maximize. If GMF didn't exist on this, it would be a very simple analysis. So it makes it more complicated, but that's sort of the price of trying to get all this money. And I still think we have a good shot. But it does feel a bit like if it was a poker game that we're pushing all in going for option 2. It doesn't mean we lose it all. It just means if we don't get it, we are obligated to carry on and do the reed bed and the wetland regardless, which was always the intention. I don't think that's, it's not a departure from the direction at all, but I just wanted to make it clear with this analysis, you had the option to not do it because you're not legally required to do it, and we can relieve the ICIP 1 funding obligation to do the reed bed and the wetland. But if Cumberland still wants to do it, option 2 is the way to go.
Oh, thank you very much, Paul. I know over the last year and a half, I've had meetings with the Minister of Municipal Affairs, Josie Osborne, our MLA, and this topic of grants and the lack of not being able to fill those grant applications with the entire project because of the costs that have gone up, not only in materials, but labor. And the government is very well aware that a lot of the projects that had the sufficient funding no longer have sufficient funding. And we've been fortunate that it's not as bad here as in some of the municipalities in British Columbia. And so I want to thank you very much for all the work you've done and how you explain everything so well to all of us that aren't quite up to standards in some areas, but you've made it very clear, and I certainly support option 2. I would hate to lose you at this point in the process, and I think you are one of the reasons we're able to do this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I don't know if Councillor Sproul can get on or if she's still off. No,
Up there for a second a minute ago.
yeah, she's in and out. She's actually on two different places here. So somebody, okay, you're there?
Yes, I am. I've got, anyway, I'm on the laptop now. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. So.
Do you have any questions for Paul?
Well, I'm concerned that we might have used a lot of time has gone and how much we have achieved with the whole thing. I understand to some degree all the complications, but one question I have is climate resiliency. It mentions in the report, one of the reports, that it wasn't considered at the early stages. Now the government requires that in all applications for grants. I'm just curious as to why, right from the get-go, climate change and resiliency wasn't part of the scope.
It's a really good question, and I might have oversimplified it. So let me clarify it, if you like. The LWMP process was all about primarily how to achieve the wastewater management requirements. How are we going to get into regulatory compliance for now and for the future? That was and is and must remain the primary focus. So if you're not achieving that, then you're failing. The way we go about achieving that, we have other factors that come into it, and climate mitigation, GHGs, is one of them. The climate resiliency, certainly it wasn't forefront, and it wasn't even in the discussion, I guess, at the time, the word resiliency as such. However, we had contemplated it with things like the use of reclaimed water and so on. But the specific things such as increased flooding risk, we would deal with flooding risk when it came to the actual design of the treatment system. It wasn't really a factor in choosing between our different LWMP options, right? So you get to that as part of the next one. So it was, I shouldn't say it wasn't considered at all. It was in some extent, and then other parts of it you then look at when you actually get into the detailed design of the preferred option. And I might add, for the normal LWMP process, you choose your preferred option at the end of stage 2, which we did, and then you study it in detail in stage 3. Of course, what we're doing here is we've chosen it and we're building it because, you know, we're 20 years behind on getting into compliance. So normally you would be doing what we've got here, the conceptual and even the preliminary design would be done as part of stage 3 LWMP, and you consider all of these sorts of things. So because we've had to race ahead and try and build it to get into compliance, it forced the hand on that. But then overall on the climate resiliency, this concept of the climate lens, it's been around, but it's been institutionalized in the grant funding programs over the last 3 years, and with some specific requirements on what you should consider. And so it's become more defined in how you go about looking at it. And then obviously the heat dome and the November flooding brought it front and center again. So the flooding example, it was something where it was going to be considered in the preliminary design exactly how we flood proof this gravity treatment system. Of course, the November thing forced us back to the other way to a pumped one. And it's still a possibility that once we looked at really what was required to flood protect it, we might have concluded we're better off to pump anyway. But this one forced our hand in that gravity flow was not an option at all. So those are part of the normal process in the preliminary design as to how you consider these things. So does that answer the question, Councillor Sproul?
Yes, yes, thank you, Paul. That's great. We'll miss you.
I'm not going yet.
Okay, good, excellent.
Okay, there is a motion there on page 4 of our report.
All right. I see everyone looking. I'll move that council adopt option 2. Option 2, the integrated project approach as the preferred grant funding strategy. Move the council approve applying for scope change to ICIP 1 funding to remove the reed bed and wetlands components from the phase 1 project scope. The council approve making the application to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Environmental Quality Stream Intake 3 for funding of phase 2 of the high performance wastewater lagoon upgrade project for a grant value of $2,260,000, and that council commit to funding the municipal portion of the project $2,440,000 using a combination of existing approved green municipal fund funding, borrowing grant, and sewer reserves for a total project amount of $4.7 million.
Second,
Second.
all in favor? Councillor Sproul, do you want to say yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Carried.
We're all in, Paul.
There we go. We're all in. Chips are on the table. Thank you. And we have to wait a year from now for the reveal of the cards.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have council reports. And I will start out with, we have with us our December and January report because we missed the meeting in January. So December was filled with lots of big Christmas events that many members of council attended. And the highlight of mine was making a presentation to the Comox Valley Water Committee with Kevin McFedrin, manager of Parks and Recreation. It was a very interesting meeting, and they learned a lot of things that we were doing with our relationship with the Cumberland Community Forest Society and Mosaic Forest Management. We were well represented in Kevin's presentation. He did an excellent job of informing the committee of what we are doing. And the other thing was that, so I'll jump right into January. And the one thing that I would like to speak about, I have a full month of reports, but I would like to an update on the medical clinic. There has been a submission go into the Ministry of Health to open up the Cumberland Medical Clinic, and I'm waiting on word as to whether they're going to fund it. And so I was told that I would have an answer on Friday, and today I still don't have an answer. So it's a long process, no matter what we do, but it would certainly be nice to have that medical clinic opened up again, and it would service a lot of the residents not only in Cumberland, but the rest of the valley. So as soon as I hear, I'll let everyone on council know. And you see my report. If there's any questions that anybody would like to ask me, please do. Okay, next, Councillor Sproul. Do you have a report, Councillor Sproul? No. Okay, Councillor Kettler.
Thanks, Mayor. And just quickly say that, yeah, the delegation that you and Kevin did to CVRD was well received. It was good for the Water Committee to learn about what Cumberland's been up to. Yeah, just wanted to say, unfortunately, I don't have much to report. I was ill for quite a while with COVID, then a secondary infection. It took me out for almost a month. So my apologies for that. And thanks to council and particularly Councillor Sullivan for filling in for me at the regional district. And yeah, I'll be working on those emails out to the public as well. Trying to catch up. So Sorry for that, everyone.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Kettler, and welcome back. We did miss you. It's hard when you're sick and you can't be at the meetings. Yeah. Next, we have Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you. Yeah, December was really fun with the Santa's break room stuff. That was kind of a new thing in the village, which was really well received and well done. And I had a really good time over that weekend. I traveled to Ontario for most of December, so that's pretty much what I got up to. And last month, my reports there, mostly what I'd like to highlight is when I did fill in for Councillor Chair Kettler at the CVRD. They talked about the 2022 wood smoke reduction program coming back, and they've raised the amount for that. So for anybody looking to switch out their old stove, there's a new program with more money involved. And also the Clean BC Better Homes Rebate Municipal Top-Up Program is worth looking into. And that's for alternate sources of heat, like putting in your heat pump and stuff like that. So there's financial assistance for anybody who wants to look into those programs. And yeah, and at the end of the month, I went to the manufactured home development open house, and I was surprised to see that it was sparsely attended for all the hubbub around town. I didn't find too many inquisitive people with issues. Mostly the people there were trying to get houses, just like everybody else in this society is trying to get a house. And what I can say preliminarily is that it looks like a fantastic place for exactly that development. That's what I could say from my experience from the open house. So thanks a lot.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. Some of us went to the trailer park open house on the previously announced time and day. So there was nobody at all there. So I'm glad you made it in. Yeah, my basically two updates. Well, there's lots of stuff there, but I have been elected to the executive of the library board. So that'll be a bigger dive into library for me, which I'm looking forward to. And then I also was appointed to the local government policing modernization roundtable. And those meetings will start, I believe, in February. We haven't set a schedule for the first one, but it's imminent. And I think I'll just leave it at that unless anybody has questions. Most of the rest is the same old, same old.
It's been a very busy 2 months. It's surprising sometimes what we have. Okay, could I have a motion, please, to receive?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Next, we have that council received the report rezoning 3699 Bevan Road, first and second reading of bylaw 1165.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Welcome, Karen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good evening, Mayor and Council. So this report introduces an amendment bylaw to the zoning bylaw for first and second reading. And the bylaw that's being introduced would rezone a recent addition to the Comox Valley Waste Management Center to the north of the existing landfill from I2 heavy industrial and IGR industrial greenway reserve to I4 refuse industrial, which matches the zoning of the current landfill. And the purpose of the rezoning is to permit for secondary leachate pond, which would be a use associated with the landfill cell on the remainder of the property. So the CVRD expanded their property not so long ago to acquire this piece of land to add the secondary leachate pond. The purpose of that pond is to act as for an overflow. So if the main leachate pond during heavy rain flows can't handle the flow, there's a place for the leachate to go. So it has important environmental benefits. And yeah, essentially it's to level out the big swings that happen potentially in flow during heavy rainfall. In association with this this proposal, village staff discussed a statute right away along the property, and the land to be rezoned, so a portion of the now landfill property, to add a 6-meter wide corridor, active transportation corridor to that piece of land, and then continue working with the CVRD to extend that in both directions. The proposed rezoning and use of the land is supported in general by the regional growth strategy. It's supported by our official community plan, which is already zoned for industrial, and the zoning by our Bevan Industrial Lands Plan supports the corridor, the active transportation corridor alongside the land as to be rezoned. So I just want to point out a few things for you. So the rezoning would permit I-4 refuse industrial, but when you go to the actual bylaw, which is appended to the report, we're actually excluding part of the refuse industrial, the refuse disposal from the zone. So it might sound a bit look a little bit curious to you, but so the purpose is why refuse industrial I-4 is needed at all is to allow for the leachate pond. However, the village and the CVRD discussed there's no immediate plans to use that land, or no plans at all, I should say, to use that land for a landfill sell in the future. So that is a bigger process CVRD would have to go through if that was ever to happen, to update its plan for the landfill. And then the village would have to look at that as well very carefully. So that's why the zone is written as it is. It essentially permits the leachate pond. And then other uses that are currently permitted also on the landfill that allow for waste diversion activities, compost facility, and associated uses. Let me see. The other important thing that I did want to point out is that the 500-meter setback that the province requires through its environmental landfill criteria for municipal solid waste between any landfill footprint and the food processing industry and other uses is maintained. The leachate pond does not actually add, according to those criteria, to the landfill footprint. So the buffer is still well over 500 meters. It's calculated at 593 meters. And this was one of concern, of course, to the Aciano development to the north of the landfill, and they attended the information meeting and were satisfied with that buffer. Let me see if I have anything else I wanted to bring to your attention. Yeah, so the intent with the the corridor for the multi-use trail is to implement what's in the Bevan Industrial Land Use Plan, Concept Plan, which identifies a multi-use corridor along all of Bevan Road, and then joining back with the former Wellington Colliery Railway right of way to the north and potentially to the south and into town. That's the long-term goal. So the CVRD has agreed to work with the village on a statute right of way, bordering the lands to be rezoned, so that upper parcel that's recently was acquired and consolidated with the landfill. And then we will also be investigating continuing the pathway all along the landfill. It requires checking into where the current fence is situated relative to the road right away. So there's a little bit more work to be done there. But we expect that the CVRD staff will seek support from their board in an upcoming meeting. And we would report back to this when this bylaw comes back to you for third reading and potentially adoption. I think those were the key points I really wanted to make. So yeah, if there's any questions.
Yes, Karen. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, that was an interesting report. I'm really happy to see that the right of way is being planned to put in from Cumberland out to the landfill and the new development, and could potentially go all the way to Bevan and up to Forbidden Plateau. So it's great that all these things are working together to make something like that. The second question I have is, or comment, there was mention of food composting or composting, maybe I heard. Was it food composting that you mentioned there?
Yeah, so currently the CVID, right now, the plan is to put in the secondary pond, the leachate pond. The possible other long-term uses of the site are still being investigated by the CVID, but it may be other recycling facilities, compost facility, uses associated with the waste diversion at the landfill. Could be possible other uses for that site. But currently there's no specific plans, but the zoning would permit for that.
Okay, so sorry if I missed something here. So not all the composting will be done in Campbell River. I thought, is it just food composting that's going to out of town?
You know, I'm sorry, I'm not too familiar with the specific landfill plans regarding composting. I know they currently do have a facility on the site, I believe, right, where they're creating where they're accepting compost, I believe. But it looks like Courtney has an answer to this one.
Okay, thank you.
There was a development permit application in front of council for the same property several months ago for a transfer station related to the compost function. So that's a separate item, and that's a bit further south on the property. And that's not subject of this rezoning.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Councillor Sullivan. You're muted.
No, I don't have anything to add. I'm just happy to see that the concept is being followed.
Okay.
And the right way is important. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to support with the multi-use pathway conversation. And I also understand that there will be a buffer of trees on the north side. I think that's really important. And also, hoping Councillor Kettler, who's disappeared from my screen, is going to ask about the other replacing the existing trees, because there are some good sized trees, and the report does say that those will be removed. So I'd like to see that replanting happening sooner rather than later, so that the trees have more time to grow.
Councillor Kettler's still on. Okay,
Yep,
Councillor
I'm
Kettler.
here. Yeah, so maybe just to follow up with that, to ask staff about, currently there doesn't look like there is any trees on that north side to create a buffer. So maybe that's where some of the trees that are being cut down could be replanted, but also, you know, screening for the roadside and the multi-use trail would also be a good place for replanting. But it sounds like it has to go back to Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board for discussion. So yeah, hopefully we can highlight those desired outcomes with the board.
Take those suggestions to the board for certain.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just to quickly comment on that, as per the earlier report, the environmental development permit will come back to you, and the potential screening to the industrial properties to the north could be part of that report, or that DP requirement. The land is actually regenerating, not too bad. So when you go out there, there's quite a few small fir coming in and salal understory. So there could the buffer might not be in this terribly onerous. So.
Okay. So would somebody like to move the motions?
Sure. That council give first and second reading to the zoning amendment bylaw number 1165, 2022. And that council direct staff to work with the Comox Valley Regional District to register a 6 meters wide statutory right-of-way for the multi-use trail running parallel to Bevan Road along the lands to be rezoned, and pursue an establishment of the multi-use trail corridor along the remainder of the Comox Valley Waste Management Center property.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Next, that council receive council remuneration bylaw report.
Oversee.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Thank you, Council. You'll recall earlier in January, Council reviewed its annual remuneration, and looked at a comparison group of similar municipalities, and selected the average rate of those comparable municipalities to make an increase to Cumberland Council's remuneration. And those rates would take effect in January 2023 after this fall's election. And the mayor's rate would be $25,008. And the councillor rate would be 60% of that, which would be about $1,500 in 2023. And that doesn't include the CPI increase that would be added at the time. So the idea with the percentage amount that the councillor is 60% of the mayor's rate would prevent a gap between mayor and councillor rates if the CPI were added directly. So you'll see in the attached bylaw that there's also the option for council to appoint a committee in each year of a local general election to review remuneration rates for the following council. If no changes were made to the rates at that time, then the CPI increase would automatically continue. So it gives an opportunity for that review. So the bylaw is attached to the report. Bylaw number 1166, recommended for the first 3 readings. Thank you.
Everybody happy? Then someone like to make the motion?
I'll move the council give first, second, and third reading to council remuneration bylaw number 1166, 2022.
I'll second it. All in favor? Carried. Next, 7.3.
I'll move the council adopt municipal ticket information amendment bylaw number 1162, 2022.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Next, 7.4, infrastructure asset renewal reserve fund establishment.
I'll move that council adopt the infrastructure asset renewal reserve fund establishment amendment bylaw number 116, 2022.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Next, is the reserve funds establishment amendment bylaw.
Somebody,
Like,
Earl, you're moving it?
What?
Councillor Sproul.
You put your hand up.
yes.
You're moving it.
Oh, I haven't got the words.
Okay.
I got it. I'll move the council adopt reserve funds establishment amendment bylaw number 1164, 2022.
Seconder, Councillor Sproul, all in favor? Carried. No new business. No notice motions and announcements. Question period. Please send questions by email to info@cumberland.ca using subject line question period. And please, we are having a little bit of problem with our service. So if we don't get your email through, we will certainly answer it by tomorrow afternoon. We can't hear you, Rachel.
I'm afraid we don't have access to the emails tonight, so we will get back to any questions tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Sorry for that, everyone. But next we have closed portion.
I'll move that council close the meeting to the public pursuant to section 90 of the community charter to consider the security of the property of the municipality, the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements if the council considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality, and negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at their preliminary stages, and that in the view of the council could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public.
Second. All in favor? Carried. Next, motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. It was a good night, lots of work.